Hi, this is for the second quiz of unit number 1 for the juniors. The second quiz on unit number 1, you're going to be testing on you're going to be quizzing on chapters 5, 9, 11, 21, and 25, I believe. And they're available to read on Apex. But I'm also going to read them to you now, if you'd rather listen to me. So here's chapter 5. The owners of the land came onto the land, or more often a spokesman for the owners came. They came in closed cars, and they felt the dry earth with their fingers, and sometimes they drove big earth augers into the ground for soil tests. The tenants from their sun-beaten dooryards watched uneasily when the closed cars drove along the fields. And at last the owner men drove into the dooryards and sat in their cars to talk out of the windows. The tenant men stood beside the cars for a while and then squatted on their hams and found sticks with which to mark the dust. And the open doors the women sat looking out, and behind them the children, corn-headed children with wide eyes, one bare foot on top of the other bare foot, and the toes working. The women and the children watched the men talking to the owner men. They were silent. Some of the owner men were kind, because they hated what they had to do, and some of them were angry because they hated to be cruel, and some of them were cold because they had long ago found that one could not be an owner unless one were cold. And all of them were caught in something larger than themselves. Some of them hated the mathematics that drove them, and some were afraid, and some worshipped the mathematics because it provided a refuge from thought and from feeling. If a bank or a finance company owned the land, the owner man said, the bank or the company needs, wants, insists, must have, as though the bank or the company were a monster, with thought and feeling, which had ensnared them. These last would take no responsibility for the banks or the companies because they were men and slaves, while the banks were machines and masters all at the same time. Some of the owner men were a little proud to be slaves to such cold and powerful masters. The owner men sat in the cars and explained, "You know the land is poor. You've scrabbled at it long enough, God knows." The squatting tenant men nodded and wondered and drew figures in the dust, and yes, they knew. God knows, if the dust only wouldn't fly, if the top would only stay on the soil, it might not be so bad. The owner men went on leading to their point. You know the land's getting poorer. You know what cotton does to the land. Robs it, sucks all the blood out of it. The squatters nodded. They knew, God knew, if they could only rotate the crops, they might pump blood back into the land. Well, it's too late, and the owner men explained the workings and the thinkings of the monster that was stronger than they were. A man can hold land if he can just eat and pay taxes. He can do that. Yes, he can do that until his crops fail one day and he has to borrow money from the bank. But you see, a bank or a company can't do that because those creatures don't breathe air, don't eat side meat. They breathe profits. They eat the interest on money. If they don't get it, they die the way you die without air, without side meat. It is a sad thing, but it is so. It is just so. The squatting men raised their eyes to understand. Can't we just hang on? Maybe the next year will be a good year. God knows how much cotton next year, and with all the wars, God knows what price cotton will bring. Don't they make explosives out of cotton and uniforms? Get enough wars and cotton will hit the ceiling next year, maybe. They look up questioningly. You can't depend on it. The bank, the monster, has to have profits all the time. It can't wait. It'll die. No taxes go on. When the monster stops growing, it dies. It can't stay one size. Soft fingers began to tap the sill of the car window, and hard fingers tightened on the restless drawing sticks. In the doorways of sun-beaten tenant houses, women sighed and then shifted feet, so that the one that had been down was now on top of the toes working. Dogs came sniffing near the owner cars and wetted on all 4 tires, one after another, and chickens lay in the sunny dust and fluffed their feathers to get the cleansing dust down to the skin. In the little sties, the pigs grunted inquiringly over the muddy remnants of the slops. The squatting men looked down again. What do you want us to do? We can't take less share of the crop. We're half starved now. The kids are hungry all the time. We've got no clothes, torn and ragged. If all the neighbors weren't the same, we'd be ashamed to go to meeting. And at last the owner men came to the point. The tenant systems weren't working anymore. One man on a tractor can take the place of 12 or 14 families. Pay him a wage and take all the crop. We have to do it. We don't like to do it, but the monster's sick. Something's happened to the monster. But you'll kill the land with cotton. We know we've got to take cotton quick before the land dies. Then we'll sell the land. Lots of families in the East would like to own a piece of land. The tenant men looked up alarmed. But what'll happen to us? How will we eat? You have to get off the land. The plows go through the dooryard. And now the squatting men stood up angrily. Grandpa took up the land, and he had to kill the Indians and drive them away, and Pa was born there, and he killed weeds and snakes, and a badger came, and he had to borrow a little money, and we was born here. There in the door, our children born here, and Pa had to borrow money. The bank owned the land then, but we stayed, and we got a little bit of what we raised. We know that all that, it's not us, it's the bank. A bank isn't like a man or an owner with 50,000 acres. He isn't like a man either. That's the monster. Sure, cried the tenant man, but it's our land. We measured it and broke it up. We were born on it, and we got killed on it, died on it. Even it's no good, it's still ours. That's what makes it ours, being born on it, working it, dying on it. That makes ownership, not a paper with numbers on it. We're sorry, it's not us, it's the monster. The bank isn't like a man. Yes, but the bank is only made of men. No, you're wrong there, quite wrong there. The bank is something else than men. It happens that every man in a bank hates what the bank does, yet the bank does it. The bank is something more than men. I tell you, it's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it. The tenants cried, Grandpa killed the Indians, Pa killed snakes for the land. Maybe we can kill the banks. They're worse than Indians and snakes. Maybe we got to fight to keep our land like Pa and Grandpa did. And now the ownerman grew angry. You'll have to go, but it's ours, the tenantman cried. No, the bank, the monster owns it. You'll have to go. We'll get our guns like Grandpa when the Indians came. What then? Well, first the sheriff and then the troops. You'll be stealing if you try to stay. You'll be murderers if you kill to stay. The monster isn't men, but it can make men do what it wants. But if we go, where'll we go? How will we go? We got no money. We're sorry, said the ownerman. The bank, the 50,000-acre owner can't be responsible. You're on land that isn't yours. Once over the line, maybe you can pick cotton in the fall. Maybe you can go on relief. Why don't you go on west to California? There's work there, and it never gets cold. Why, you can reach out anywhere and pick an orange. Why, there's always some work there, and it never gets cold. Why, you can reach out anywhere where there's always some kind of crop to work on. Why don't you go there? And the owner men started their cars and rolled away. The tenant men squatted down on their hams again to mark the dust with a stick, to figure, to wonder. Their sunburned faces were dark, and their sun-whipped eyes were light. The women moved cautiously out of the doorways toward their men, and the children crept behind the women, cautiously ready to run. The bigger boys squatted beside their fathers, because that made them men. After a time, the women asked, what did he want? And the men looked up for a second, and the smolder of pain was in their eyes. We've got to get off. A tractor and a superintendent, like factories. Where'll we go? The women asked. We don't know. We don't know. And the women went quietly back into the houses and herded the children ahead of them. They knew that a man so hurt and so perplexed may turn in anger, even on people he loves. They left the men alone to figure and to wonder in the dust. After a time, perhaps, a tenant man looked about at the pump put in 10 years ago with a gooseneck handle and iron flowers on the spout, at the chopping block where 1,000 chickens had been killed, at the hand plow lying in the shed, and the patent crib hanging in the rafters over it. The children crowded about the women in the houses. What are we going to do, Ma? Where are we going to go? The women said, we don't know yet. Go out and play, but don't go near your father. He might whale you if you go near him. And the women went on with the work, but all the time they watched the men squatting in the dust, perplexed and figuring. The tractors came over the roads and into the fields, great crawlers moving like insects. Having the incredible strength of insects, they crawled over the ground, laying the tracks and rolling on it, and picking it up. Diesel tractors, puttering while they stood idle. They thundered when they moved, and then settled down to a droning roar, snub-nosed monsters, raising the dust and sticking their snouts into it, straight down the country, across the country, through fences, through dooryards, in and out of gullies, in straight lines. They did not run on the ground, but on their own roadbeds. They ignored hills and gulches, water courses, fences, houses. The man sitting in the iron seat did not look like a man, gloved, goggled, rubber desk mask over nose and mouth. He was a part of the monster, a robot in the seat. The thunder of the cylinders sounded through the country, became one with the air and the earth, so that earth and air muttered in sympathetic vibration. The driver could not control it. Straight across country it went, cutting through a dozen farms and straight back. A twitch of the controls could swerve the cat, but the driver's hands could not twitch because the monster that had built the tractor, the monster that set the tractor out, had somehow got into the driver's hands, into his brain and muscle, had goggled him and muzzled him, goggled his mind and muzzled his speech, goggled his perception, muzzled his protest. He could not see the land as it was. He could not smell the land as it smelled. His feet did not stamp the clods or feel the warmth and power of the earth. He sat in an iron seat and stepped on pedals. He could not cheer or beat or curse or encourage the extension of his power, and because of this he could not cheer or whip or curse or encourage himself. He did not know or own or trust or beseech the land. If a seed dropped, did not germinate, it was nothing. If the young thrusting plant withered in drought or drowned in a flood of rain, it was no more to the driver than to the tractor. He loved the land no more than the bank loved the land. He could not admire the tractor, its machined surfaces, its surge of power, the roar of its detonating cylinders, but it was not its tractor. Behind the tractor rolled the shining discs, cutting the earth with blades, not plowing, but surgery, pushing the cut earth to the right where the second row of discs cut it and pushed it to the left, slicing blades shining, polished by the cut earth, and pulled behind the discs, the harrows combing iron teeth so that the little clods broke up and the earth lay smooth. Behind the harrows, the long cedars, 12 curved iron pins erected in the foundry, set by gears. The driver sat in his iron seat, and he was proud of the straight lines he did not will, proud of the tractor he did not own or love, proud of the power he could not control. And when that crop grew and was harvested, no man had crumbled a hot clod in his fingers and let the earth sift past his fingertips. No man had touched the seed or lusted for the growth. Men ate what they had not raised, had no connection with the bread. The land bore under iron, and under iron gradually died, for it was not loved or hated. It had no prayers or curses. At noon the tractor driver stopped, sometimes near a tenant house, and opened his lunch. Sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, white bread, pickle, cheese, spam, a piece of pie, branded like an engine part. He ate without relish, and tenants not yet moved away came out to see him, looked curiously while the goggles were taken off and the rubber dusk mask, leaving white circles around the eyes and a large white circle around nose and mouth. The exhaust of the tractor puttered on, for fuel is so cheap, it is more efficient to leave the engine running than to heat the diesel nose for a new start. Curious children crowded close, ragged children who ate their fried dough as they watched. They watched hungrily the unwrapping of the sandwiches, and their hunger-sharpened noses smelled of pickle, cheese, and spam. They didn't speak to the driver. They watched his hand as they carried food to his mouth. They did not watch him chewing. Their eyes followed the hand that held the sandwich. After a while, the tenant who could not leave the place came out and squatted in the shade beside the tractor. "Why, you're Joe Davies' boy." "Sure," the driver said. "Well, what are you doing this kind of work for, against your own people?" $3 a day. I got damn sick of creeping for my dinner, not getting it. I got a wife and kids. We got to eat. $3 a day, and it comes every day. "That's right," the tenant said, "but for your $3 a day, 15 or 20 families can't eat at all. Nearly 100 people have to go out and wander on the roads for your $3 a day. Is that right?" And the driver said, "Can't think of that. Got to think of my own kids. $3 a day, and it comes every day. Times are changing, mister, don't you know? Can't make a living on the land unless you got 2, 5, 10,000 acres and a tractor. Cropland ain't for little guys like us anymore. You don't kick up a howl because you can't make Fords or because you're not the telephone company. Well, crops are like that now. Nothing to do about it. You try to get $3 a day someplace. That's the only way." The tenant pondered. Funny thing how it is. If a man owns a little property, that property is him. It's part of him, and it's like him. If he owns property only so he can walk on it and handle it and be sad when it isn't doing well, and feels fine when the rain falls on it, the property is him. And in some way he's bigger because he owns it. Even if he isn't successful, he's big with his property. That is so. And the tenant pondered more. But let a man get property he doesn't see, or can't take time to get his fingers in, or can't be there to walk on it, why then the property is the man. He can't do what he wants. He can't think what he wants. The property is the man, stronger than he is, and he is small, not big. Only his possessions are big, and he's a servant of his property. That is so too. The driver munched the branded pines, threw the crust away. Times are changing, don't you know? Thinking about stuff like that don't feed the kids. Get your $3 a day, feed your kids. You got no call to worry about anybody's kids but your own. You get a reputation for talking like that, and you'll never get $3 a day. Big shots won't give you $3 a day if you worry about anything but your $3 a day. Nearly 100 people on the road for your $3. Where will we go? And that reminds me, the driver said, you better get out soon. I'm going through the dooryard after dinner. You filled in the well this morning. I know how to keep the line straight. But I'm going through the dooryard after dinner. Got to keep the line straight. And well, you know Joe Davies, my old man, so I'll tell you this. I got orders. Wherever there's a family not unmoved out, if I have an accident, get too close and cave the house a little, well, I might get a couple dollars. And my youngest kid never had shoes yet. I built it with my hands, straightened old nails to put the sheathing on. Rafters are wired to the stringers with baling wire. It's mine. I built it. You bump it down, I'll be in the window with a rifle. You even come too close and I'll pop you like a rabbit. It's not me. There's nothing I can do. I'll lose my job if I don't do it. And look, suppose you kill me. They'll just hang you. But long before you're hung, there'll be another guy on the tractor and he'll bump the house down. You're not killing the right guy. That's so, the tenant said. Who gave you orders? I'll go after him. He's the one to kill. You're wrong. He got his orders from the bank. The bank told him, clear those people out. It's your job. Well, there's a president of the bank. There's a board of directors. I'll fill up the magazine or the rifle and go into the bank. The driver said, fellow is telling me the bank gets orders from the east. The orders were make the land show profit or we'll close you up. But where does it stop? Who can we shoot? I don't aim to starve to death before I kill the man that's starving me. I don't know. Maybe there's nobody to shoot. Maybe the thing isn't men at all. Maybe, like you said, the property's doing it. Anyway, I told you my orders. I got to figure, the tenant said. We've all got to figure. There's some way to stop it. It's not like lightning or earthquakes. We got a bad thing made by men, and by God, there's something we can change. The tenant sat in his doorway, and the driver thundered his engine and started off, tracks falling and curving, harrows combing in the failey of the cedar, slipping into the ground. Across the dooryard, the tractor cut, and the hard, foot-beaten ground was seeded field, and the tractor cut through again. The uncut space was 10 feet wide, and back he came. The iron guard bit into the house corner, crumbled the wall, and wrenched the little house from its foundation so that it fell sideways, crushed like a bug. And the driver was goggled, and a rubber mask covered his nose and mouth. The tractor cut a straight line, and the air and the ground vibrated with its thunder. The tenant man stared after it, his rifle in his hand. His wife was beside him, and the quiet children behind. And all of them stared after the tractor. Here's chapter 9. In the little houses, the tenant people sifted their belongings, the belongings of their fathers and their grandfathers, picked over their possessions for the journey to the west. The men were ruthless because the past had been spoiled, but the women knew how the past would cry to them in the coming days. The men went into the barns and the sheds. The plow, the harrow, remembered the war that we planted mustard. Remember, a fellow wanted us to put in that rubber bush they call gaule. Get rich, he said. Bring out those tools. Get a few dollars for them. $18 for that plow, plus freight. Sears Roebuck. Harness, carts, cedars, little bundles of hose. Bring them out. Pile them up. Load them in the wagon. Take them to town. Sell them for what you can get. Sell the team in the wagon, too. No more use for anything. 50 cents isn't enough to get for a good plow. The cedar cost $38. $2 isn't enough. Can't haul it all back. We'll take it, and a bitterness with it. Take the well pump and the harness. Take halters, collars, hames, and tugs. Take the little glass brow-banded jewels, rose red under glass. Got those for the big gelding. Remember how he lifted his feet when he trotted? Junk piled up in a car. Can't sell a hand plow anymore. 50 cents for the weight of the metal. Discs and tractors, that's the stuff now. We'll take it all, junk, and give me $5. You're not buying only junk. You're buying junked lives, and more you'll see you're buying bitterness, buying your plow to plow your own children under, bearing the arms and spirits that might have saved you. $5, not 4. I can't haul them back. We'll take them for 4. But I warn you, you're buying what will plow your own children under. You won't see, you can't see. Take them for 4. Now, what'll you give for the team and wagon? Those fine bays, matched they are, matched in color, matched the way they walk stride to stride, and the stiff pull, straining hams and buttocks split-second time together. And in the morning, the light on them bay bright, they look over the fence, sniffing for us. The stiffers swivel to hear us, and the black forelocks. I've got a girl. She likes to braid the manes and forelocks, puts little red bows on them, likes to do it. Not anymore. I could tell you a funny story about that girl on that off bay. Would make you laugh. Off horse is 8, near is 10, but might have been twin colts the way they work together. See the teeth, sound all over, deep lungs, feet fair and clean. How much? $10 for both in the wagon? Oh, Jesus Christ, I'd shoot him for dog feed first. Oh, take him quick, mister. You're buying a little girl, plaiting the forelocks, taking off her hair ribbon to make bows, standing back, head cocked, rubbing the soft noses with her cheek. You're buying years of work, toilless, and you're buying a sorrow that can't talk. But watch it, mister. There's premium goes with this pile of junk, and the bay horse is so beautiful. A packet of bitterness to grow in your house into flower. Someday we could have saved you, but you cut us down, and soon you'll be cut down, and there'll be none of us to save you. And the tenant man came walking back, hands in their pockets, hats pulled down. Some bought a pint and drank it fast to make the impact hard and stunning, but they didn't laugh and they didn't dance. They didn't sing or pick the guitars. They walked back to the farms, hands in pockets and heads down, shoes caking the red dust up. Maybe we can start again in the new rich land in California where the fruit grows. We'll start over, but you can't start. Only a baby can start. You and me, why, we're all that's been. The anger of a moment, 1,000 pictures, that's us. This land, this red land is us, and the flood years and the dust years and the drought years are us. We can't start again. The bitterness we sold to the junk man, he got it all right, but we still have it. We have it still. And when the owner man told us to go, that's us. And when the tractor hit the house, that's us until we're dead. To California or any place, even one, a drum major leading a parade of hurts, marching with our bitterness. And someday the armies of bitterness will all be going the same way. And they'll all walk together, and there will be a dead terror from it. The tenant men scuffed home to the farms through the red dust. When everything that could be sold was sold, stoves and bedsteads, chairs and tables, little corner cupboards, tubs and tanks, still there were piles of possessions, and the women sat among them, turning them over and looking off beyond and back, pictures, square glasses, and here's a vase. Now we know, you know well, what we can take and what we can't. We'll be camping out. A few pots to cook and wash in, and mattresses and comforts, lanterns and buckets and a piece of canvas. Use that for a tent. The kerosene can, no, that's a stove. And clothes, take all the clothes. And the rifle wouldn't go out naked of a rifle. When shoes and clothes and food and even hope is gone, we'll have the rifle. When Grandpa came, didn't I tell you he had pepper and salt and rifle, nothing else? That goes. And a bottle for water, that just about fills us. Right up the sides of the trailer, and the kids can sit in the trailer, and Grandma on a mattress. Tools, a shovel and saw and wrench and pliers and axe too. We had that axe 40 years. Look how she's worn down, and ropes, of course. The rest leave it or burn it up. And the children came. If Mary takes that doll, that dirty ragged doll, I gotta take my engine bow. I got to. And this round stick big as me, I might need this stick. I had this stick so long, a month, maybe a year. I gotta take it. What's it like in California? The women sat among the doomed things, turning them over and looking past them and back. This book, my father had it. He liked a book, Pilgrim's Progress, used to read it, got his name in it, and his pipe. Steel smells rank, and this picture, an angel. I looked at that before the first three come. Didn't seem to do much good. Think we could get this China dog in? Aunt Sadie brought it from the St. Louis Fair. See, wrote right on it. No, I guess not. Here's a letter my brother wrote the day before he died. Here's an old-time hat. These feathers, never got used to them. No, there isn't room. How can we live without our lives? How will we know it's us without our past? No, leave it. Burn it. They sat and looked at it and burned it into their memories. How will it be not to know what lands outside the door? How if you wake up in the night and know the willow tree's not there? Can you live without that willow tree? Well, no, you can't. The willow tree is you. The pain on that mattress there, that dreadful pain, that's you. And the children, if Sam takes his engine bow and his long round stick, I get to take these two things. I choose the fluffy pillow. That's mine. Suddenly there was nervousness. Got to get out quick now. Can't wait. We can't wait. And they piled up the goods in the yards and set fire to them. They stood and watched them burning, and then frantically they loaded up the cars and drove away, drove in the dust. The dust hung in the air for a long time after the loaded cars had passed. Now it's chapter 11. The houses were left vacant on the land, and the land was vacant because of this. Only the tractor sheds of corrugated iron, silver and gleaming, were alive, and they were alive with metal and gasoline and oil, the discs of the plows shining. The tractors had lights shining, for there is no day and night for tractor. The discs turn the earth in the darkness, and they glitter in the daylight. When a horse stops work and goes into the barn, there is life and vitality there, breathing and warmth, and the feet shift on the straw, and the jaws chomp on the hay. The ears and the eyes are alive. There's a warmth of life in the barn, and the heat and smell of life. But when the motor of a tractor stops, it is as dead as the ore it came from. The heat goes out of it like the living heat that leaves a corpse. Then the corrugated iron doors are closed, and the tractor man drives home to town, perhaps 20 miles away, and he need not come back for weeks or months, for the tractor is dead. And this is easy and efficient, so easy that the wonder goes out of work, so efficient that the wonder goes out of land of the working of it, and with the wonder the deep understanding of the relation. And in the tractor man there grows a contempt that comes only to a stranger who has little understanding and no relation. For nitrates are not the land, nor are phosphates, and the length of fiber in the cotton is not the land. Carbon is not a man, nor salt, nor water, nor calcium. He is all these, but he is much more, and the land is so much more than its analysis. The man who is more than his chemistry, walking on the earth, turning his plow point for a stone, dropping his handles to side over an outcropping, kneeling in the earth to eat his lunch. The man who is more than his elements knows the land that is more than its analysis. But the machine man, driving a dead tractor on land he does not know and love, understands only chemistry, and he is contemptuous of the land and of himself. When the corrugated iron doors are shut, he goes home, and his home is not the land. The doors of the empty houses swung open and drifted back and forth in the wind. Bands of little boys came out from the teams to break the windows and to pick up the debris, looking for treasures. And here's a knife with half the blade gone. That's a good thing, and smells like a rat died here. And look what Whitty wrote on the wall. He wrote that in the toilet in school, too, and a teacher made him wash it off. When the folks first left, and the evening of the first day came, the hunting cats slouched in from the fields and mewed on the porch. When no one came out, the cats crept through the open doors and walked mewing through the empty rooms. And when they went back to the fields, and were wild cats from then on, hunting gophers and field mice and sleeping in ditches in the daytime. When the night came, the bats, which had stopped at the doors for fear of light, swooped into the houses and sailed about through the empty rooms. And in a little while they stayed in dark corners during the day, folded their wings high, and hung heads down among the rafters, and the smell of their droppings was in the empty houses. And the mice moved in and stored weed seeds in corners and boxes in the backs of drawers in the kitchens. And weasels came in to hunt the mice, and the brown owls flew shrieking in and out again. Now there came a little shower. The weeds sprang up in front of the doorstep, where they had not been allowed, and grass grew up through the porch boards. The houses were vacant, and a vacant house falls quickly apart. Splits started up the sheathing from the rusted nails. A dust settled on the floors, and only mouse and weasel and cat tracks disturb it. On a night the wind loosened a shingle and flipped it to the ground. The next wind pried into the hole where the shingle had been, lifted off 3, and the next a dozen. The midday sun burned through the hole and threw a glaring spot on the floor. The wild cats crept in from the fields at night, but they did not mew at the doorstep anymore. They moved like shadows of a cloud across the moon into the rooms to hunt the mice, and on windy nights the doors banged and the ragged curtains fluttered in the broken windows. And here's chapter 21. The moving, questing people were migrants now. Those families which had lived on a little piece of land, who had lived and died on 40 acres, had eaten or starved on the produce of 40 acres, had now the whole west to rove in. And they scampered about looking for work, and the highways were streams of people, and the ditch banks were lines of people. Behind them more were coming. The great highway streamed with moving people. There in the middle and southwest had lived a simple agrarian folk who had not changed with industry, had not farmed with machines, or known the power and danger of machines in private hands. They had not grown up in the paradoxes of industry. Their senses were still sharp to the ridiculousness of the industrial life. And then suddenly the machines pushed them out, and they swarmed on the highways. The movement changed them. The highways, the camps along the road, the fear of hunger and the hunger itself changed them. The children without dinner changed them. The endless moving changed them. They were migrants, and the hostility changed them, welded them, united them. Hostility that made the little towns group and arm as though to repel an invader. Squads were pick handles, clerks and storekeepers with shotguns, guarding the world against their own people. In the West there was panic when the migrants multiplied on the highways. Men of property were terrified for their property. Men who had never been hungry saw the eyes of the hungry. Men who had never wanted anything very much saw the flare of want in the eyes of the migrants. And the men of the towns and of the soft suburban country gathered to defend themselves, and they reassured themselves that they were good and the invaders bad, as a man must do before he fights. They said, these goddamn Okies are ignorant and are dirty and ignorant. They're degenerate sexual maniacs. The goddamn Okies are thieves. They'll steal anything. They've got no sense of property rights. And the latter was true, for how can a man without property know the ache of ownership? And the defending people said, they bring disease, they're filthy, we can't have them in the schools, they're strangers. How'd you like to have your sister go out with one of them? The local people whipped themselves into a mold of cruelty. Then they formed units, squads, and armed them with clubs, with gas, with guns. We own the country. We can't let these Okies get out of hand. And the men who were armed did not own the land, but they thought they did. And the clerks who drilled at night owned nothing, and the little storekeepers possessed only a drawer full of debts. But even a debt is something. Even a job is something. The clerk thought, I get $15 a week. Suppose a goddamn Okie would work for 12. And the little storekeeper thought, how could I compete with a debtless man? And the migrants streamed in on the highways, and their hunger was in their eyes, and their need was in their eyes. They had no argument, no system, nothing but their numbers and their needs. When there was work for man, 10 men fought for it, fought with a low wage. If that fellow will work for 30 cents, work for 25. If he'll take 25, I'll do it for 20. Not me, I'm hungry, I'll work for 15, I'll work for food. The kids, you ought to see them little boils like coming out and they can't run around. Give them some windfall fruit and they bloated up. Me, I'll work for a little piece of meat. And this was good, for wages went down and prices stayed up. The great owners were glad, and they sent out more handbills to bring more people in, and wages went down and prices stayed up. And pretty soon now we'll have serfs again. And now the great owners and the companies invented a new method. A great owner bought a cannery. When the peaches and the pears were ripe, he cut the price of fruit below the cost of raising it. And as cannery owner, he paid himself for the price for the fruit and kept the price of canned goods up and took his profit. And the little farmers who owned no canneries lost their farms, and they were taken by the great owners, the banks and the companies who also owned the canneries. As time went on, there were fewer farmers. The little farmers moved into town for a while and exhausted their credit, exhausted their friends, their relatives, and then they too went on the highways, and the roads were crowded with men ravenous for work, murderous for work. And the companies, the banks, worked at their own doom, and they did not know it. The fields were fruitful, and starving men moved on the roads. The granaries were full, and the children of the poor grew up rachitic, and the pustules of pellagra swelled on their sides. The great companies did not know that the line between hunger and anger is a thin line, and money that might have gone to wages went for gas, for guns, for agents and spies, for blacklists, for drilling. On the highways, the people moved like ants and searched for work, for food, and the anger began to ferment. Chapter 25. The spring is beautiful in California, valleys in which the fruit blossoms are fragrant, peak in white waters in a shallow sea. Then the first tendrils of the grapes, swelling from the old gnarled vines, cascade down to cover the trunks. The full green hills are round and soft as breasts, and on the level vegetable land are the mile-long rows of pale green lettuce and the spindly little cauliflowers, a gray-green unearthly artichoke plants. And then the leaves break out on the trees, and the petals drop from the fruit trees and carpet the earth with pink and white. The centers of the blossoms swell and grow and color cherries and apples, peaches and pears, figs which close the flower and the fruit. All California quickens with produce, and the fruit grows heavy, and the limbs bend gradually under the fruit, so that little crutches must be placed under them to support the weight. Behind the fruitfulness of men in understanding and knowledge and skill, men who experimented with seed, endlessly developing the techniques for greater crops of plants whose roots will resist the million enemies of the earth, the mold, the insects, the rust, the blights. These men work carefully and endlessly to perfect the seed, the roots. And these are the men of chemistry who spray the trees against pests, who sulfur the grapes, who cut out disease and rots, mildew, and sicknesses. Doctors of preventive medicine, men at the borders who look for fruit, flies for Japanese beetle, men who quarantine the sick trees and root them out and burn them, men of knowledge, the men who graft the young trees, the little vines, are the cleverest of all, for theirs is a surgeon's job, is tender and delicate, and these men must have surgeon's hands and surgeon's hearts to slit the bark, to place the grafts, to bind the wounds and cover them from the air. These are great men. Along the rows the cultivators move, tearing the spring grass and turning it under to make fertile earth, breaking the ground to hold the water up near the surface, ridging the ground in little pools for the irrigation, destroying the weed roots that may drink the water away from the trees. And all the time the fruit swells and the flowers break out in long clusters on the vines, and in the growing year the warmth grows and the leaves turn dark green, the prunes lengthen like little green birds' eggs, and the limbs sag down against the crutches under the weight, and the hard little pears take shape, and the beginning of the fuzz comes out of the peaches. Grape blossoms shed their tiny petals, and the hard little beads become green buttons, and the buttons grow heavy. The men who work in the fields, the owners of the orchards, watch and calculate. The year is heavy with produce, and men are proud for of their knowledge they can make the year heavy. They have transformed the world with their knowledge. The short, lean wheat has been made big and productive. Little sour apples have grown large and sweet, and that old grape that grew among the trees and fed the birds, its tiny fruit has mothered 1,000 varieties, red and black, green and pale pink, purple and yellow, and each variety with its own flavor. The men who work in the experimental farms have made new fruits, nectarines, and 40 kinds of plums, walnuts with paper shells, and always they work, selecting, grafting, changing, driving the earth to produce. And first the cherries ripen, cent and a half a pound. Hell, we can't pick them for that. Black cherries and red cherries, full and sweet, and the birds eat half of each cherry, and the yellow jackets buzz into the holes the birds made. And on the ground the seeds drop and dry with black shreds hanging from them. The purple prunes soften and sweet. My God, we can't pick them and dry and sulfur them. We can't pay wages, no matter what wages. And the purple prunes carpet the ground. At first the skins wrinkle a little, and swarms of flies come to feast. And the valley is filled with the odor of sweet decay. The meat turns dark, and the crops shrivel on the ground. And the pears grow yellow and soft. $5 a ton, $5 for 40, 50-pound boxes, trees pruned and sprayed, orchards cultivated, pick the fruit, put it in boxes, load the trucks, deliver the fruit to the cannery. 40 boxes for $5. We can't do it, and the yellow fruit falls heavily to the ground and splashes on the ground. The yellow jackets dig into the soft meat, and there's a smell of ferment and rot. Then the grapes. We can't make good wine. People can't buy good wine. Rip the grapes from the vines. Good grapes, rotten grapes, wasp-stung grapes, press stems, press dirt and rot. But there's mildew and formic acid in the vats, and add sulfur and tannic acid. The smell from the ferment is not the rich odor of wine, but the smell of decay and chemicals. Oh well, it has alcohol in it anyway. They can get drunk. Little farmers watched debt creep up on them like the tide. They sprayed the trees and sold no crop. They pruned and grafted and could not pick the crop. And the men of knowledge had worked to consider that the fruit is rotting on the ground, and the decaying mash in the vine vats is poisoning the air. And taste the wine, no grape flavor at all, just sulfuric and tannic acid and alcohol. This little orchard will be a part of a great holding next year, for the debt will have choked the owner. The vineyard will belong to the bank. Only the great owners can survive, for they own the canneries too, and 4 pears peeled and cut in half, cooked and canned, still cost 15 cents. And the canned pears do not spoil. They will last for years. The decay spreads over the state, and the sweet smell is a great sorrow in the land. Men who can graft the trees and make the seeds fertile and big can find no way to let the hungry people eat the produce. Men who have created new fruits in the world cannot create a system whereby the fruits may be eaten. And the failure hangs over the state like a great sorrow. The works of the root of the vines of the trees must be destroyed to keep up the price. And this is the saddest, bitterest thing of all. Cartloads of oranges dumped on the ground. The people came for miles to take the fruit, but this could not be. How would they buy oranges at 20 cents a dozen if they could drive out and pick them up? And men with horses squirt kerosene on the oranges, and they're angry at the crime, angry at the people who have come to take the fruit. A million people hungry, needing the fruit, and kerosene sprayed over the golden mounds, and the smell of rot fills the country. Burn coffee for fuel in the ships, burn corn to keep warm, it makes a hot fire. Dump potatoes in the rivers and place guards along the banks to keep the hungry people from fishing them out. Slaughter the pigs and bury them, and let the putrescence drip down into the earth. There's a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There's a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There's a failure here that topples all our success. The fertile earth, the straight tree rows, the sturdy trunks, and the ripe fruit, and children dying of pellagra must die because a profit cannot be taken from an orange, and coroners must fill in the certificates died of malnutrition because the food must rot or be forced to rot. The people come with nets to fish for potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back. They come in rattling cars to get the dumped oranges, but the kerosene is sprayed, and they stand still and watch the potatoes float by, listen to the screaming pigs being tilled in a ditch and covered with quicklime. Watch the mountains of oranges slop down to putrefying ooze, and in the eyes of the people there is a failure, and in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. And this was from John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. And here is the reference. And that is for quiz 2 of Unit 1.